The night is bleeding fire. November 1942, Guadalcanal. A wooden boat cuts through black water. No lights, no armor, just plywood and prayer. At the helm stands a 23-year-old Navy coxswain. His hands grip the wheel so tight, his knuckles have gone white. His eyes scan the darkness ahead. Behind him the beach is burning. Tracer rounds arc across the sky like dying stars. The Japanese know he's coming. They've been waiting. The first shell hits the water 30 feet to his left. The explosion sends a geyser of salt and shrapnel into the air. His crew ducks. He doesn't. He can't. If he flinches, they're all dead. "Steady!" he screams over the engine. "Steady, God damn it!" The Higgins boat lurches forward, 36 feet of plywood and desperation. The Japanese call these boats floating coffins. They're not wrong. Most coxswains don't survive their third mission. This is his ninth. On that beach ahead, 47 wounded Marines are waiting. They've been waiting for 6 hours. No ammunition left. No hope left. Command told them no rescue was possible. Command was wrong. Another shell. Closer this time. The boat shudders. Water sprays across the deck. In the darkness, he can see muzzle flashes from the tree line. Japanese machine guns. At least 3 positions. His boat has no armor. A rifle round can punch through the hull. Those machine guns will turn it into splinters. He pushes the throttle forward anyway. What happens in the next 11 minutes will save 47 men. It will earn him a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. And it will begin a legend that the United States Navy tried very hard to forget. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand what made this moment possible, we need to go back. Back to a small fishing town. Back to a boy who learned to read the water before he learned to read books. Back to the day the Japanese made the mistake of underestimating a man and his plywood coffin. This is the story of John Hawk Hawkins. And those 47 Marines on that burning beach? They were just the beginning. John David Hawkins was born in 1919 in a fishing village on the coast of Louisiana that most maps didn't bother to name. Population, 412. Main industry, shrimp. Secondary industry, stubbornness. His father ran a fishing boat. His grandfather ran a fishing boat. His great-grandfather ran a fishing boat. The Hawkins men had salt water in their blood and calluses on their hands before they could walk. By the time John was 12, he could navigate the bayous blindfolded. By 15, he was running his father's boat alone through storm swells that sent experienced sailors running for shore. His father used to say, "That boy doesn't fear the water fears him." School never interested him much. The classroom felt like a cage, but the water was freedom. The water made sense in ways that algebra and history never did. December 7th, 1941 changed everything. John was 22 years old when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. He was mending nets on the dock when Old Man Thibodeau came running down the pier, shouting about the radio broadcast. John didn't say a word. He set down his nets, walked to his truck, and drove 43 miles to the nearest Navy recruitment office. The recruiter looked at his application and laughed. "Son, you got a 9th grade education and you smell like fish. What exactly do you think you're going to do in the United States Navy?" John's answer was simple. "I can drive a boat through anything. Put me on a boat." They put him on a boat, the worst boat in the entire Pacific Fleet, the Higgins boat. Officially designated LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. Unofficially designated Death Trap. 36 feet long, 10 feet wide, plywood hull, open top, maximum speed, 12 knots, which was barely faster than a man could run. Armament, 2 .30 caliber machine guns, sometimes only one. Armor, none. The Higgins boat was designed for one purpose: deliver troops from ship to shore. It was never designed to bring them back. It was never designed to survive. The first time John saw his assigned vessel, his commanding officer gave him a piece of advice. "Hawkins, you see that boat? That boat is a coffin with an engine. Your job is to get Marines to the beach. Nobody cares if you make it back. The Corps needs bodies on sand, not live taxi drivers. Understood? John walked around the boat slowly. He ran his hand along the plywood hull. He checked the engine. He examined the ramp mechanism. Then he looked at his commanding officer and said 7 words that would define his entire war. "Sir, I'm going to need more fuel." The other coxswains thought he was crazy. The Marines called Higgins boat operators coffin drivers. It was not a term of endearment, it was a statement of fact. The casualty rate for Higgins boat crews in the Pacific was over 70%. 7 out of 10 didn't come home. John didn't care about statistics. Statistics were for people who didn't know how to read the water. He spent every free hour studying his boat, learning her rhythms, understanding her limits. While other coxswains played cards and wrote letters home, John was in the water, testing approaches, timing turns, calculating exactly how fast he could beach and retract. The other sailors mocked him. "What's the point, Hawk? That plywood piece of shit is going to get you killed no matter how good you drive it." John's response became legendary in his unit. "The boat ain't the problem. The problem is y'all drive scared. You drive scared, you drive slow. You drive slow, you die." In August 1942, John Hawkins and his floating coffin were shipped to a small island in the Solomon chain, an island that would soon earn a nickname of its own, the Island of Death, Guadalcanal. To understand what John Hawkins accomplished, you need to understand where he did it. And Guadalcanal wasn't just a battle, it was hell, with a coastline. August 7, 1942. The United States launched its first major offensive against Japan. The target? A tiny island in the Solomon chain, 90 miles long and 25 miles wide. Most Americans had never heard of it. Within 6 months, it would be burned into the national consciousness. Why did Guadalcanal matter? One word: Henderson Field. The Japanese were building an airfield on that island. If completed, Japanese bombers could reach Australia, New Zealand, and the critical Allied supply lines across the Pacific. The entire war in the Pacific hinged on that single airstrip. The Marines landed on August 7th. They captured the airfield within 2 days. And then the Japanese responded. What followed was 6 months of continuous combat that would push American forces to the absolute breaking point. The Japanese didn't just want Guadalcanal back, they needed it. They threw everything they had at that island: infantry, artillery, naval bombardments, airstrikes, the Imperial Japanese Navy's most elite units. Night after night, the Tokyo Express, Japanese destroyers and cruisers would race down from their bases, bombard Henderson Field, deliver troops, and disappear before dawn. The Marines were outnumbered, outgunned, outsupplied, and they were dying. Malaria swept through the American lines. At one point, over 60% of the Marines on Guadalcanal were infected. Dysentery followed, then dengue fever, then starvation. Supply ships couldn't get close enough to shore. The Japanese controlled the waters at night. The Americans controlled them during the day. The Marines were caught in between. The Navy tried to maintain supply and evacuation operations. But the waters around Guadalcanal became a graveyard. In November alone, the U.S. Navy lost 2 cruisers, 7 destroyers, and dozens of smaller craft. So many ships sank in the sound between Guadalcanal and the neighboring islands that sailors gave it a new name, Iron Bottom Sound. Into this nightmare stepped the Higgins boat operators. When the big ships couldn't approach, the Higgins boats had to. When wounded Marines were trapped on isolated beaches, the Higgins boats were sent to retrieve them. When supply drops needed to reach forward positions, the Higgins boats carried them. The problem was simple. Higgins boats were never designed for this. The LCVP was built to deliver troops during an initial beach assault. That's it. Beach, drop the ramp, unload Marines, retract if possible, probably die. The entire concept assumed acceptable losses. The entire design assumed expendability. But at Guadalcanal, the Higgins boats were being asked to do something entirely different. They were being asked to survive. repeatedly, night after night, through waters controlled by enemy destroyers, under skies owned by enemy aircraft, toward beaches covered by enemy guns. The Japanese figured this out quickly. They started hunting the Higgins boat specifically. Zero fighters would strafe them from above. Shore batteries would zero in on their engine noise. Machine gun nests were positioned specifically to cover likely landing points. The Japanese developed a name for the Higgins boats. In captured documents translated after the war, they were referred to as Hakobune no Mokan, floating coffins. The Japanese weren't being poetic, they were being accurate. Their intelligence estimated that the average Higgins boat operating near Guadalcanal would survive approximately 2.3 missions before being destroyed. 2.3 missions. For most coxswains, those numbers held true. But John Hawkins wasn't most coxswains. To understand why he survived when others died, you need to understand what made him different. And the difference wasn't courage. Courage was common at Guadalcanal. The difference was technique. Most Higgins boat operators drove their boats the way they'd been trained. Straight approaches, consistent throttle, standard evasive patterns. The problem was, the Japanese had studied those patterns too. They knew exactly where an American boat would zig. They calculated exactly when it would zag. Their gunners adjusted accordingly. John threw the manual away. His approach was chaos. Controlled, calculated chaos, but chaos nonetheless. He never held a consistent speed. He would accelerate, then cut throttle, then slam forward again. Japanese gunners trained to lead a target moving at 12 knots would fire at empty water as John suddenly dropped to 6, then surged to 14. He never took the same route twice. Even if a channel had worked perfectly the night before, he would find a different approach. He memorized every reef, every sandbar, every current around Guadalcanal's coastline. He knew where the water was shallow enough to lose a pursuing craft. He knew where the coral would rip the bottom out of any boat that didn't know the path. And he never, ever drove scared. Fear makes you predictable, he told his crew. Predictable gets you killed. You want to survive? Be the thing they don't expect. His commanding officers didn't know what to make of him. His methods violated every standard procedure. His fuel consumption was triple the normal rate. His maintenance requests were constant. Engines don't like being run at random speeds. But his survival rate was impossible. By October 1942, John Hawkins had completed 7 evacuation missions. 7 missions through waters that had claimed dozens of other boats. His crew was still alive. His boat was still floating. And the Marines were starting to talk. Word spread through the foxholes and the aid stations. There was a coxswain who could get through anything, a boat that couldn't be sunk. If you were wounded and trapped, you wanted Hawk coming for you. The legend was building. The Japanese were about to test it. October 23, 1942. The night everything changed. John Hawkins was asleep in his bunk when the runner came, 3 in the morning. The kind of darkness that swallows everything. The kind of hour when bad news travels fastest. Hawkins, CO wants you. Now. He didn't ask questions. He never did. Questions wasted time. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his jacket, and followed the runner through the mud to the command tent. Inside, 3 officers stood around a map table. Their faces told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a routine briefing. This was desperation wearing military uniforms. Lieutenant Commander Morrison spoke first. Hawkins, we've got a situation. Bad one. He pointed to a position on the map, a beach designated Point Cruz, approximately 4 miles east of Henderson Field. John knew that beach. Everyone knew that beach. The Japanese had artillery positions in the hills directly above it. Approaching Point Cruz by water was considered suicide. We've got 31 Marines trapped there, wounded. They were part of a patrol that got caught in a Japanese counterattack this afternoon. They've been pinned down for 9 hours. No ammunition, no support. Battalion tried to reach them overland, but the Japanese have the routes covered. Morrison paused. They're going to die if we don't get them out tonight. John studied the map. His mind was already calculating. Distances, timing, approach angles. "What about air support?" he asked. "Negative. Cloud cover's too heavy. Even if it wasn't, we don't have pilots qualified for night operations." "Naval support?" "Iron bottom sound, Hawkins. You know what's out there. We send a destroyer into those waters at night. We lose a destroyer." John nodded slowly. He understood what they were asking. He understood what they weren't saying. "The other boats?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "Peterson's boat took a direct hit last night. Williams is still being repaired. Kowalski's crew refused the mission." "Refused?" "I can't make men drive into certain death, Hawkins. I can only ask for volunteers." The tent went quiet. Outside, somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. Japanese guns, American guns. It was impossible to tell any more. The whole island sounded like thunder that never stopped. John looked at the map one more time. Point Cruz. The artillery positions, the approach angles. 31 Marines waiting in the dark, probably convinced no one was coming. "What's the tide situation?" Morrison blinked. Of all the questions he'd expected, that wasn't one of them. "Tide? I don't know. Low tide around 0400, I think. I'll need it exact, and I'll need the current charts for the Eastern Channel." "Hawkins, are you saying—" "I'm saying get me the tide tables, sir. I'll have those Marines back before sunrise." 20 minutes later, John Hawkins was standing on the deck of his Higgins boat, watching his crew prepare for departure. 3 men, Jenkins, the bow gunner, Martinez, the engineer, O'Brien, general crew and backup for everything. They knew what they were sailing into. None of them had to be there. All of them chose to be. Jenkins checked the .30 caliber one final time and looked at John. "Hawk, what's the play?" John was staring at the darkness where the ocean met the sky. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "We go in quiet, kill the engine at 400 yards, drift on the current. The tide's going out, so it'll push us toward shore. Japanese won't hear us coming until we're already on the sand." "And the artillery?" "Artillery needs spotters. Spotters need light. No moon tonight. If we stay dark, stay low, they'll be firing blind." Martinez spoke up from the engine compartment. "And if they're not firing blind? If they've got the beach zeroed?" John finally looked at his crew. In the darkness, his face was impossible to read. "Then we drive faster than their shells, same as always." At 0317 hours, the Higgins boat slipped away from the transport ship and disappeared into the Black Pacific. The first 15 minutes were quiet, just the rumble of the engine and the slap of water against plywood. John kept the throttle low, conserving fuel, minimizing noise. Around them the darkness was absolute. No stars, no moon, just black water and blacker sky. At 0342 they rounded the point that brought Point Cruz into view, and John's blood went cold. The beach was burning, not the scattered fires of combat, real flames. The Japanese had set the tree line ablaze. Whether it was deliberate or the result of artillery, it didn't matter. The effect was the same. That beach was lit up like a stage. Anyone approaching would be completely visible. "Hawk," Jenkins' voice was tight. "They can see us coming." "I know." "So what do we go anyway." John pushed the throttle forward. The engine roared. The boat surged. And the Japanese opened fire. The first shell hit the water 40 yards to their left. The explosion sent a wall of spray crashing over the deck. John didn't flinch. He was counting, timing the interval between shots. 7 seconds. The Japanese artillery was manually loaded. 7 seconds between shells. That was his window. Second shell, 30 yards to the right. Closer. John cut the wheel hard, throwing the boat into a sharp turn. The hull groaned. Martinez swore. Third shell, 20 yards behind them. They were bracketing him now, walking the shells closer with each shot. "Hold on!" John killed the throttle completely. The boat lurched, losing momentum instantly. The fourth shell screamed over their bow, missing by feet, exploding in the water ahead of where they would have been. Before the spray had settled, John slammed the throttle forward again. The sudden acceleration threw Jenkins against the gunwale. "What the hell, Hawk?" They're leading us, calculating where we'll be in 7 seconds, so we don't go where they expect. The pattern repeated. Accelerate. Stop. Turn. Accelerate. Never consistent. Never predictable. The artillery kept firing. The shells kept missing. 200 yards from shore, the machine guns joined in. John could see the muzzle flashes in the tree line. 3 positions, maybe 4. Tracers streaked across the water, some passing close enough that he could feel the heat. Jenkins, suppressing fire. Keep their heads down. The bowgun opened up. The sound was deafening in the small boat. Brass casings clattered across the deck. Jenkins wasn't aiming to kill. At this range, in this darkness, hitting anything would be luck. He was aiming to distract, to make the Japanese gunners flinch. 100 yards, 50. The boat's hull scraped against sand. They were beaching. John had calculated the angle perfectly. The boat came in sideways, using the hull itself as a shield between the Marines on the beach and the Japanese guns in the tree line. "Ramp down! Move!" The metal ramp crashed into the sand, and John saw them. 31 Marines. Most of them couldn't walk. Some of them couldn't move at all. They were scattered across the beach like broken toys, huddled behind whatever cover they could find. Rocks, driftwood, the bodies of their dead friends. A sergeant crawled toward the boat, dragging a wounded private behind him. Jesus Christ, they actually sent someone. "Get your men on board, Sergeant. We've got maybe 3 minutes before they adjust their fire." The loading was chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Walking wounded helped carry the critical cases. Marines who had been holding their guts in for hours finally let themselves scream as they were lifted. The boat filled with blood and salt water, and the sounds of men who had given up hope finding it again. 11 minutes. That's how long it took. 11 minutes with Japanese machine guns raking the water around them. 11 minutes with artillery shells walking closer and closer. 11 minutes of John Hawkins standing at the helm of his plywood coffin, completely exposed, shouting orders like the gates of hell weren't opening behind him. "That's 31. Ramp up." The ramp lifted. John threw the engine into reverse. The boat groaned, stuck for 1 terrible second on the sand, then broke free. The return journey was worse. The Japanese had finally found their range. Shells were landing within 20 yards. Machine gun fire was concentrated now, multiple positions tracking the sound of the engine. A round punched through the hull 2 feet from Martinez's head, then another, then a burst that took out the forward gun entirely. Jenkins screamed, "I'm hit, Hawk, I'm hit." "Martinez, get him below the gunwale, keep pressure on it." John couldn't help. He couldn't even look. Everything in him was focused on one thing, the darkness ahead. The transport ship waiting somewhere in that darkness. Safety. Survival. A shell landed close enough to lift the stern out of the water. The engine coughed, sputtered. For one horrible moment, John thought they were dead. Then the engine caught again. The boat surged forward. The Japanese guns fell silent. Range exceeded. Ammunition conserved. They thought they'd sunk another coffin. They were wrong. At 04:38 hours, John Hawkins's Higgins boat reached the transport ship. 31 Marines were transferred to the medical bay. Jenkins was carried off on a stretcher, cursing and crying and laughing all at once. He would lose 2 fingers. He would keep his life. The commanding officer was waiting on deck. "Hawkins, how the hell did you do that?" John's hands were still shaking. Adrenaline, exhaustion, something else he couldn't name. "Same as always, sir. Drove faster than their bullets." The CO looked at the boat. 47 bullet holes. Water still pouring from the damaged sections. The forward gun destroyed. The hull cracked in 3 places. "That boat should have sunk, Hawkins. You should be dead." John looked back at his battered vessel, his coffin, his partner. "She held together, sir. She always does." There was a moment of silence. Then the CO asked the question that defined John Hawkins' war. "Can you go again?" John didn't hesitate. "When's the next run, sir?" Che 1 week later, October 30th, 1942. The Japanese launched their largest ground offensive of the entire Guadalcanal campaign. 7,000 soldiers, elite units, the Sendai Division. They came out of the jungle like a tide, wave after wave, crashing against the Marine lines around Henderson Field. The fighting was apocalyptic, hand-to-hand combat in the darkness, Marines firing until their barrels glowed red, then fighting with bayonets, then with fists, then with rocks. Bodies piled so high in some sectors that soldiers used them as cover. By dawn on October 31st, the Japanese attack had been broken, but the cost was catastrophic. Marine units that had been positioned as listening posts and forward observers were annihilated. Scattered survivors were trapped behind Japanese lines. Wounded men were stranded on isolated beaches where evacuation had become impossible. The numbers were staggering. Beach Alpha, 24 wounded Marines, cut off when their position was overrun. Beach Bravo, 29 wounded. Survivors of a company that had been reduced from 112 men to 31. Beach Charlie, 36 wounded, including 2 officers with critical intelligence about Japanese positions. Total, 89 men, spread across 3 beaches, all of them behind enemy lines, all of them dying. Command assembled every available Higgins boat, 3 vessels, 3 crews. John Hawkins was assigned to Beach Charlie, the farthest, the most dangerous, the most heavily defended. Hawkins, you're the best we've got. If anyone can reach Charlie, it's you. What about Alpha and Bravo? Peterson and Ramirez will handle those. John knew Peterson. Good man, solid coxswain. Ramirez was newer, only 5 missions under his belt. Sir, those beaches are going to be hot. Really hot. Peterson and Ramirez are the only other boats we have, Hawkins. This isn't optional. Those men need to be extracted tonight, or there won't be anyone left to extract. Tomorrow. At 2200 hours, 3 Higgins boats departed the transport ship. By 2247, 2 of them were gone. Peterson's boat took a direct hit from a Japanese shore battery 400 yards from Beach Alpha. The explosion broke the vessel in half. Peterson and 2 of his crew were killed instantly. The 3rd crew member survived long enough to be captured. His body was found 3 weeks later. The details of what happened to him are not appropriate for this story. Ramirez made it to Beach Bravo. He was loading wounded when a Japanese Zero, flying a rare night patrol, spotted the boat's wake in the moonlight. 3 strafing runs, 43 rounds. Ramirez died at the helm. His crew died trying to save the Marines already on board. The boat drifted until it ran aground on a reef where Japanese soldiers killed the survivors at dawn. John heard the radio reports as they came in. Peterson, gone. Ramirez, gone. 89 Marines waiting on 3 beaches, 1 boat left, his boat. The mathematics were simple. Beach Charlie alone had 36 wounded. His boat's maximum capacity was 36 men. If he went to Charlie and back, he could save 36 men. The other 53 would die. John Hawkins made a decision that violated every order he'd been given. He didn't go to Beach Charlie. He went to Beach Alpha first. The beach where Peterson had died. The beach with 24 Marines waiting. The beach that Japanese gunners had already zeroed in on, having just sunk a boat there 30 minutes earlier. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the only way to save everyone. Martinez, how much fuel do we have? Enough for 2 runs, maybe 3 if we push it. We're going to need all 3. Martinez understood immediately. Hawk, that's not possible. We can't hit 3 beaches in one night. The Japanese will be waiting at every... They'll be waiting where they expect us. We're not going where they expect. John pulled out a hand-drawn map. Charts he'd made himself during weeks of observation, marking every reef, every current, every approach angle that standard navigation ignored. Beach Alpha. The Japanese just sank Peterson there, so they'll be celebrating. They won't expect another boat for at least an hour. We go in now while they're relaxed. And after Alpha? We don't go to Bravo. That's where they'll expect us next. We go to Charlie, hit the farthest beach while they're still focused on the middle. And then Bravo last? By then, we'll have been operating for 3 hours. They'll assume we're either sunk or retreated. They'll let their guard down. That's when we hit Bravo. O'Brien spoke up from the back of the boat. Hawk, that's a lot of assumptions. You want to go back to the transport and wait? Silence. Didn't think so. Now shut up and let me drive. Beach Alpha. 2311 hours. John approached from the north using a channel so shallow that standard navigation charts marked it as impassable. His boat drew 3 feet of water. The channel had 4 feet at high tide. He had 6 inches of clearance. One wrong move would tear the bottom out. He made no wrong moves. The beach was chaos. The wreckage of Peterson's boat was still burning on the water. Japanese soldiers were picking through debris, looking for survivors to capture. They weren't watching the water. John cut his engine 200 yards out. The boat drifted in on the current, silent as a ghost. By the time the Japanese realized another boat had arrived, Marines were already scrambling aboard. 24 men? Is that everyone? A corporal was the last one up the ramp. That's all of us. Jesus, where did you come from? Doesn't matter. Get down and stay quiet. John didn't restart the engine. Instead, he used a paddle, a goddamn paddle, to push the boat back into the current. For agonizing minutes, they drifted in silence while Japanese soldiers shouted on the beach, confused, searching for the source of the disturbance. By the time they opened fire, John was 400 yards out, engine roaring, boat surging toward the next target. Beach Charlie. 024 hours. The farthest beach, the most dangerous. John approached from the east through waters so thick with coral that no sane coxswain would attempt them. But John had studied these reefs for weeks. He knew the path, a serpentine route, barely wide enough for his boat, that would bring him to the beach from an angle the Japanese had never defended, because no one had ever been crazy enough to try it. The Marines on Charlie had given up hope. They'd heard the radio reports. 2 boats sunk. Rescue operations canceled. They were making peace with their gods when John's boat emerged from the darkness. A lieutenant was the ranking survivor. How many can you take? All of you. There's 36 of us. Your boat's rated for... I know what she's rated for. Get your men on board, Lieutenant, now. They loaded in 8 minutes. John's boat was now carrying 60 men, 24 from Alpha, 36 from Charlie. The maximum capacity was 36. The gunnels were nearly underwater. One wave would swamp them. John didn't care about waves. He cared about 29 Marines still waiting on Beach Bravo. The journey back was a nightmare. The overloaded boat moved like a wounded animal, slow, sluggish. Waves that would normally break harmlessly against the hull now threatened to pour over the sides. Marines bailed water with their helmets. The wounded screamed as salt water soaked into their injuries. John took them to the transport ship. 60 Marines unloaded in 11 minutes. Then he turned around. Beach Bravo. Orwujum 47 hours. The Japanese were waiting. They'd figured out what was happening. They'd repositioned their machine guns. They'd brought up a mortar team. Beach Bravo was a kill zone. John went anyway. His approach was unlike anything he'd tried before. He didn't come from the water. He came from the land side. Using a channel that curved around the beach, he approached from behind the Japanese positions. The enemy was watching the ocean. They never thought to watch their backs. By the time the first Japanese soldier realized what was happening, John's boat was already on the sand, ramped down, Marines scrambling aboard. The firefight that followed lasted 6 minutes. John's crew fired everything they had. Martinez operated the .30 caliber until the barrel glowed orange. O'Brien threw grenades he'd scrounged from the Alpha Marines. John himself stood at the helm with a Thompson submachine gun, firing one-handed while steering with the other. 29 Marines loaded. The ramp came up, the boat retracted. The Japanese mortar team finally got their range. 3 shells hit the water within 20 feet of the boat. Shrapnel peppered the hull. O'Brien took a piece in his thigh. Martinez was bleeding from a cut on his scalp. But the engine held, the boat moved, the darkness swallowed them. At 02:58 hours, John Hawkins' Higgins boat reached the transport ship for the second time that night. 89 Marines, 3 beaches, 1 boat, 1 crew, 1 man who refused to accept the mathematics of death. The commanding officer was waiting. "Hawkins, I ordered you to go to Beach Charlie." "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed that order?" "Yes, sir." "You took an overloaded boat through coral reefs in the dark?" "Yes, sir." "You engaged Japanese forces with small arms fire during an evacuation?" "Yes, sir." Silence. "Hawkins, I should have you court-martialed." "Yes, sir." More silence. Then, quietly, "How many?" 89, sir, all 3 beaches." The commanding officer looked at the boat. It was barely floating. The hull was riddled with holes. The engine was smoking. Water was pouring in faster than the pumps could handle. By morning, that boat would be on the bottom of Iron Bottom Sound. But 89 Marines would be alive. "Get some sleep, Hawkins, and get that boat repaired." "Sir? I suspect we're going to need you again tomorrow." John Hawkins slept for 4 hours. When he woke, the shipyard crew was already working on his boat. The coffin was getting ready for another funeral. Except the only ones dying would be Japanese expectations. The Japanese were not stupid. This is important to understand. The historical narrative often paints enemy forces as faceless obstacles, cannon fodder for American heroism. But the Imperial Japanese Navy was one of the most sophisticated military organizations in the world. Their officers were educated, strategic, and ruthlessly efficient. They noticed John Hawkins. It took them 2 weeks to figure out what was happening, 2 weeks of evacuation missions that should have failed, 2 weeks of boats that should have sunk, 2 weeks of Marines who should have died slowly on isolated beaches, instead arriving safely at American ships. The pattern was undeniable. Captured Japanese documents, declassified after the war, reveal the extent of their frustration. November 3, 1942. Report from Lieutenant Yamamoto Kenji, commander of Coastal Artillery at Point Cruz. American landing craft continue to operate despite effective bombardment. Our gunners have expended over 300 shells in the past week, with only 1 confirmed kill. The Americans appear to have developed new evasion techniques that render our predictive firing ineffective. Request additional spotters and illumination rounds. November 7, 1942. Intelligence summary from Captain Tanaka Hiroshi, Imperial Japanese Navy. Analysis of American small craft operations suggests a single vessel and crew are responsible for the majority of successful evacuations. This vessel has been observed on at least 9 occasions. It displays non-standard movement patterns that indicate an experienced operator with detailed knowledge of local waters. Recommend prioritizing destruction of this specific target. November 12, 1942. Personal diary of Sergeant Major Ito Masaru, infantry commander at Beach Bravo. The ghost boat came again last night. We had 3 machine gun positions covering the water. We fired over 500 rounds. The boat did not sink. It did not even slow down. My men are beginning to say it is protected by spirits. I tell them this is foolish talk, but I am no longer certain. The Japanese called it the ghost boat. They called its operator the demon, and they started hunting him specifically. The first assassination attempt came on November 9th. Japanese intelligence had identified the general area where American transport ships anchored at night. They dispatched a team of swimmers, early predecessors to what would later become Japanese Special Forces, to locate and destroy the evacuation boats while they were docked. 3 swimmers reached the American anchorage. 1 was shot by a sentry. 1 became tangled in anchor chains and drowned. The 3rd made it to a Higgins boat and attached a magnetic mine to the hull. The wrong hull. The boat that exploded at 3:47 hours was Lieutenant Peterson's replacement vessel, recently arrived and not yet assigned a crew. John Hawkins's boat was docked 200 yards away. The second attempt was more direct. November 14th. Japanese forces positioned a sniper team on a ridge overlooking the most commonly used evacuation beach. Their orders were simple: ignore the Marines, kill the boat operator. John took a bullet that night. It hit him in the left shoulder, passing through the muscle and exiting cleanly, without hitting bone or artery. He didn't stop driving. He didn't even tell his crew until the mission was complete. When Martinez saw the blood, he nearly lost his mind. "Hawk, Jesus Christ, you're hit. Why didn't you say something?" "You would have panicked. We had 20 Marines to get off that beach. Panicking wasn't an option." The Navy corpsman who treated him was incredulous. "Coxswain, you operated a boat for 43 minutes with a gunshot wound. How?" John's answer was simple. "Wasn't the first time I worked through pain, won't be the last." The third attempt was the most sophisticated. Japanese naval intelligence had mapped John's approach patterns. Not perfectly, he varied his routes constantly, but well enough to identify the general channels he used most frequently. On November 18th, they mined one of those channels. John spotted the mines, not all of them, but enough. The moonlight caught the metal casings beneath the water. He saw them with barely 100 yards to spare. The turn he executed should have been impossible. A Higgins boat at full speed carrying 31 Marines, pivoting 90 degrees in open water. The physics said no. The boat said otherwise. They lost a section of the hull to coral during the emergency redirect. They took on water the entire return journey, but they didn't hit the mines. After the war, American intelligence officers interrogated a Japanese naval commander who had served at Guadalcanal. They asked him about the ghost boat. His response was recorded in the declassified files. "We tried everything: artillery, machine guns, mines, snipers, aircraft. Nothing worked. It was not natural. Some of my officers believed the boat was blessed by American gods. I did not believe in such things, but I could not explain how it survived. I still cannot." By mid-November, the Japanese had officially designated John Hawkins' boat as a priority target. Resources were diverted specifically to destroy it. Troops that could have been fighting Marines were instead watching the water, waiting for the ghost boat to appear, and John just kept coming, night after night, mission after mission. The plywood coffin that wouldn't die, the demon who wouldn't stop, the man who was rewriting the mathematics of war, one impossible evacuation at a time. November 23, 1942. The storm came from nowhere. Weather in the Solomon Islands was notoriously unpredictable, but this was something else entirely. A typhoon that hadn't appeared on any forecast, spinning up from the warm Pacific waters with terrifying speed. By nightfall, the winds were hitting 45 knots. Waves were cresting at 12 feet. Rain fell so heavy that visibility dropped to near zero. Every boat in the American fleet was ordered to shelter. Every single one. And then the radio transmission came. 73 Marines, trapped on a position designated Point Overlook, a rocky outcropping on the eastern coast of Guadalcanal. They had been cut off 3 days earlier during a Japanese advance. Airdrops had been attempted and failed. Overland rescue had been attempted and failed. They were out of food, almost out of water. Their ammunition was gone, and they had wounded 31 critical cases who wouldn't survive another night without medical attention. The Japanese knew they were there. They were closing in. By dawn, they would overrun the position. 73 Marines would either be killed or captured. Given Japanese treatment of prisoners at Guadalcanal, there was no practical difference. The commanding officer assembled his senior staff. "We need options." "Sir, there are no options. The storm makes any water approach impossible. Even if a boat could launch, navigation would be completely blind. And the Japanese have batteries covering every approach to that position." "So we just let them die?" Silence. "We don't have a choice, sir. No boat can make it in these conditions." A voice from the back of the tent. "I can." Every head turned. John Hawkins stood in the doorway, dripping wet, still wearing the clothes he'd been sleeping in. He'd heard the radio transmission from his bunk. He'd come without being summoned. "Hawkins, you can't be serious. Those waves would flip a Higgins boat in seconds." "With respect, sir, that depends on who's driving." "The storm. I've driven through worse in Louisiana. Hurricane season. We'd run boats in 60-knot winds. Waves don't flip you if you know how to ride them. The Japanese batteries won't be able to target in this visibility. They'll be firing blind. So will I, but I know those waters better than they do." The commanding officer stared at him for a long moment. "Hawkins, I cannot order you to do this. This is a volunteer mission, and I have to be clear with you. I do not expect you to survive. The odds are, there are no odds. This is almost certainly suicide." John didn't hesitate. "Sir, there are 73 Marines out there who are definitely going to die if no one goes. You're talking about odds. I'm talking about certainty. 73 certain deaths versus 1 probable death. That math is easy. Your crew? Volunteers only. No one who doesn't want to go." The commanding officer looked at his staff. No one spoke. What was there to say? "Hawkins, Godspeed." John walked back to his boat. Martinez was already there, preparing the engine. "I heard the radio, Hawk. Figured you'd do something stupid. You don't have to come." "Yeah, I do." O'Brien arrived a minute later, his thigh still bandaged from the Bravo Beach shrapnel. "Room for one more?" "O'Brien, your leg." "My leg's fine. Besides, you're going to need someone to bail water. From what I hear, there's going to be a lot of water." At 2134 hours, John Hawkins's Higgins boat departed the transport ship and disappeared into the storm. The journey should have been impossible. The waves were mountainous, 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, walls of black water that rose above the boat and crashed down like the fists of angry gods. The wind screamed so loud that verbal communication was impossible. John navigated by compass alone, trusting instruments over his blind eyes. The boat rolled, constantly, sickeningly. At one point they tilted so far to port that O'Brien was convinced they were going over. They didn't. John threw his weight to starboard, compensating, balancing, riding the chaos like he'd been born in it. Because in a way he had. Louisiana hurricanes, bayou storms. The water had been trying to kill John Hawkins his whole life. Tonight was just another attempt. 47 minutes into the journey, they almost lost Martinez. A wave larger than the others, a rogue, a monster, caught the boat broadside. The impact was like being hit by a truck. Martinez, who had been checking the engine compartment, was thrown over the side. John didn't think. He acted. He grabbed Martinez's wrist as the engineer went over, holding on with a grip that should have been impossible, against the force of the water. For 11 seconds, O'Brien counted, John held his crewman suspended over the churning Pacific, muscles screaming, shoulder wound reopening, refusing to let go. O'Brien grabbed Martinez's other arm. Together they hauled him back aboard. Martinez lay on the deck, coughing seawater, shaking. "Hawk, you could have let go. You should have let go. You could have been pulled over." John was already back at the helm. "We don't leave people behind. That's the whole point of tonight. Now get back to that engine." At 23:41 hours, through rain and waves and darkness, they found Point Overlook. John would later describe the next few minutes as the most difficult of his entire war. The beach at Point Overlook wasn't really a beach. It was a rocky shelf, barely 20 feet wide, surrounded by reefs and outcroppings that could gut a boat in seconds. In calm conditions, approaching would have required extreme precision. In a typhoon, it required something beyond skill. It required faith. John cut the engine. The boat began to drift, carried by currents he couldn't see toward rocks. He couldn't see toward Marines he couldn't see. "Hawk, what are you doing?" "Listening." Listening to what? The water. Silence. Or rather, the absence of engine noise beneath the scream of the storm. John's eyes were closed. His hands were light on the wheel. He was feeling the boat move beneath him, sensing the subtle shifts in current, the tiny changes in wave pattern that indicated shallow water, rocks, danger, port. He turned slightly left, starboard, right, port again. A rock materialized out of the darkness, close enough to touch. They slid past it with inches to spare. Jesus, Hawk. Quiet. More turns, more impossible navigation. John was driving blind, driving by touch, driving by 23 years of instinct developed on waters that weren't so different from these. And then they were there. The beach, the rocky shelf. 73 Marines who had given up all hope, staring at the impossible boat emerging from the storm like a vision from another world. A captain was the ranking survivor. He waded into the water to meet the boat, tears streaming down his face, indistinguishable from the rain. How? How are you here? How is this possible? John's answer was simple. How many wounded? 31 critical, another 16 walking wounded. The rest can move. Get everyone on board, now. We don't have much time. The loading process was chaos. Wounded men screaming as they were carried over rocks and through surf. Marines slipping on wet stone, falling, getting up, pushing forward. The boat filling with bodies, with blood, with hope. John had done the math. 73 men. His boat was rated for 36. Even in calm conditions, this would be insane. In a typhoon, with 12-foot waves, carrying twice his maximum capacity. Hawk, we can't take everyone. We'll sink. We're taking everyone. The boat? I'll handle the boat. You handle the Marines. 73 men loaded in 19 minutes. The boat was so overloaded that the gunnels were barely 6 inches above water. Every wave that hit them sent gallons pouring over the sides. Marines bailed with helmets, with hands, with anything they could find. John started the engine. The propeller strained against the weight. For a horrible moment, nothing happened. The boat sat there, waves crashing over her, slowly taking on water. Then she moved, inch by inch, foot by foot, the plywood coffin dragging herself off the rocks, carrying her impossible burden, refusing to die. The return journey took 2 hours. 2 hours of riding waves that should have killed them. 2 hours of constant bailing that barely kept pace with the water pouring in. 2 hours of wounded Marines praying to gods they'd never believed in, and one coxswain from Louisiana who didn't pray at all because he was too busy steering. The engine gave out with 400 yards to go. Just stopped. No warning. 1 second they were moving, the next they were dead in the water, drifting, the transport ship visible as a distant light in the storm. Martinez? I'm trying. The fuel line, something's blocked. How long? I don't know. 5 minutes? 10? They didn't have 10 minutes. They were taking on water faster than they could bail. Without forward momentum, the boat was sitting lower and lower. Another 5 minutes, and they'd be underwater. John made a decision. Everyone who can move, over the side. We swim. Hawk, in this storm, we're half a mile from the ship. The current's moving toward it. Anyone who can swim has a chance. If we all stay on this boat, we all die. The captain understood. Walking wounded over the side. Everyone else, stay with the boat. 31 men went into the water, Marines who could barely stand, swimming through a typhoon because a coxswain from Louisiana told them to. And then Martinez got the engine running. It sputtered, it coughed, but it ran. John pointed the boat toward the transport ship and pushed the throttle as far as it would go. They made it with 8 inches of freeboard left. 8 inches between the gunwale and the waterline. Another wave, another minute, another moment of weakness, and they would have gone under. The Marines who swam were picked up by rescue boats dispatched from the transport. All 31 survived. The boat reached the ship's ladder at 0213 hours. 73 Marines began climbing to safety. John Hawkins stayed at the helm until the last man was off. Then he sat down, put his head in his hands, and began to shake. He shook for 15 minutes, his body finally releasing the tension, the terror, the absolute impossibility of what he had just done. Martinez and O'Brien sat beside him. No one spoke. There were no words. The commanding officer came down to the boat as dawn broke. The storm was passing. The first light of morning revealed the full extent of the damage. The hull was cracked in a dozen places. The engine compartment was flooded. The forward gun mount had been torn completely off. The boat was sinking slowly, even tied to the ship's side. "Hawkins!" John looked up. His eyes were red. His shoulder was bleeding through his shirt. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in one night. "Sir?" "That's 312. "Sir?" "Marines, that you've personally evacuated. We've been keeping count. As of tonight, you've pulled 312 men off beaches where they would have died. 312. John was quiet for a long moment. "It's not about numbers, sir." "No. It's about the ones you couldn't get, the ones who died waiting, the ones who watched boats sink before they could reach them." The commanding officer nodded slowly. "We can't save everyone, Hawkins." "I know, sir, but we can try. We can always try." He looked at his boat, the Coffin, the miracle, the impossibility that had become possible through nothing but stubbornness and skill and the absolute refusal to accept failure. "Sir?" "Yes, Hawkins." "When can I get a new boat?" 312 Marines. That was the final count. 312 men pulled off beaches where they would have died. 17 missions. More rescues than any other Higgins boat operator in the entire Guadalcanal campaign. The numbers told a story, but they didn't tell the whole story. The whole story was in the letters that started arriving 6 months later. Letters from mothers who still had sons. Letters from wives who still had husbands. Letters from children who still had fathers. All because a 23-year-old coxswain from Louisiana refused to accept that his plywood boat was a coffin. Mrs. Eleanor Jameson of Philadelphia wrote in March 1943, "Dear Mr. Hawkins, I do not know how to thank you. My son Robert was one of the Marines you evacuated from Beach Alpha on October 30th. He had been shot twice. The doctors say he would have died within hours if you had not gotten him to the transport ship. Robert is home now. He will never walk without a limp, but he is alive. He talks about you constantly. He says you are the bravest man he has ever met. I believe him. God bless you, Mr. Hawkins. God bless you forever." There were hundreds of letters like this. John kept every one. But the official recognition was slower to come. The Navy had a problem. With John Hawkins, he was a hero, unquestionably. But he was also a discipline issue. He had disobeyed direct orders on multiple occasions. He had violated safety protocols consistently. He had operated his vessel in conditions that regulations explicitly prohibited. The brass couldn't figure out how to honor a man who had repeatedly ignored everything they told him to do. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, John's immediate superior, submitted the paperwork for a Navy Cross. The Navy Cross was the second highest decoration the Navy could award, given for extraordinary heroism in combat. The recommendation was rejected. The official reason: insufficient documentation of specific heroic acts. The real reason: John Hawkins made the Navy look bad. His success highlighted the failures of standard doctrine. If one coxswain could save 312 Marines by ignoring regulations, what did that say about the regulations? Morrison fought the decision. He submitted appeals. He gathered witness statements from the Marines John had rescued. He wrote personal letters to admirals he had served with. In February 1943, the Navy finally compromised. John Hawkins was awarded the Silver Star, the third highest decoration for valor in combat. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against enemy forces, Coxswain Hawkins, demonstrating extraordinary skill and courage, successfully executed 17 evacuation missions under direct enemy fire, resulting in the rescue of over 300 American Marines. His actions reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Naval Service. It was a worthy recognition. but Morrison always believed John deserved more. Years later, in a 1987 interview with a naval historian, the retired Commander Morrison said, "John Hawkins should have received the Medal of Honor. I've said that for 45 years, and I'll say it until I die. That man did things that should have been impossible. He saved lives that should have been lost. And the Navy gave him a Silver Star because they were embarrassed that he was better than their training." The Marines were less conflicted in their appreciation. In January 1943, the Marine Corps Commandant sent John a personal letter of thanks. It was an unusual honor. The Marines rarely acknowledged individual Navy personnel. But John Hawkins had become a legend among the Marine units at Guadalcanal. The letter read, in part, "The Marines you rescued have spoken of your courage with an intensity I have rarely witnessed. To them, you are not merely a Navy coxswain. You are the reason they lived to fight again, to see their families again, to contribute to the ultimate victory we all seek. The Marine Corps does not easily express gratitude to those outside our ranks, but I express it now, unreservedly, to you." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. In November 1945, after the war ended, American intelligence officers were processing captured Japanese documents at a facility in Tokyo. Among the papers was a file labeled "Enemy Tactics, Small Craft Operations, Guadalcanal." The file contained detailed analysis of American Higgins boat operations during the campaign, charts, diagrams, statistical analyses, and a separate section on what the Japanese called anomalous targets. One entry stood out. Target designation, Ghost Boat. Confirmed engagements, 23 estimated kills, 0 assessment. Operator displays tactical abilities significantly beyond normal American training. Evasion patterns suggest either advanced military training or exceptional natural talent. Recommend classification as high priority target. Note, despite priority designation and significant resource allocation, this target was never successfully neutralized. Reason unknown. At the bottom of the file, someone, presumably a Japanese officer, had written a personal note. "We threw everything we had at this boat. It would not sink. I do not understand it. I am not sure I want to." John Hawkins' war continued after Guadalcanal. He served in subsequent Pacific operations, including the invasions of Tarawa, Saipan, and Okinawa. He was wounded twice more. He was promoted to Chief Petty Officer. He trained other coxswains in the techniques he had developed, but he never talked much about Guadalcanal. When asked, he would deflect, change the subject, talk about the Marines instead of himself. "I just drove the boat," he would say. "The Marines did the fighting. They're the heroes." The men he rescued disagreed. In 1952, a group of Guadalcanal survivors organized the first reunion. They tracked down John Hawkins, who had returned to Louisiana and was running a fishing charter business. They invited him to attend. John showed up to find over 100 men waiting for him, men with wives, men with children, men who should have been bones on a Pacific beach, instead building lives, raising families, contributing to a nation that would never know how close they came to dying. They gave him a standing ovation that lasted 11 minutes. Afterwards, a former Marine sergeant, one of the 31 men from the Point Cruz evacuation, approached John with tears streaming down his face. "Hawk, I've been wanting to say something to you for 10 years. What's that?" "I got married in 46, had a daughter in 48, named her after my mother, had a son in 50, named him after my father." He paused. "I almost named him after you, but I figured John Hawkins Jr. might get confusing, so I gave him Hawkins as his middle name instead, Thomas Hawkins Miller. That's my boy. He's 2 years old. He exists because you came for me on that beach. He'll have kids someday. They'll have kids. And every single one of them, every life that comes from my family, is because of you." John didn't know what to say. He had never thought about it that way. 312 Marines, 312 futures, thousands of descendants who would never exist if a boat called a Coffin had lived up to its name. "I just drove the boat," he said finally. The sergeant smiled. "Yeah, Hawk. That's what heroes always say." John David Hawkins died on March 15, 1994, in the same Louisiana fishing village where he was born. He was 74 years old. His obituary in the local paper was 3 paragraphs long. It mentioned his Navy service, it mentioned his Silver Star, it mentioned his fishing charter business. It did not mention 312 Marines. That number wasn't discovered until years later, when a naval historian named Dr. Catherine Morrison, daughter of Lieutenant Commander Morrison, John's commanding officer, began researching Higgins' boat operations at Guadalcanal. She found the records, the mission reports, the letters from rescued Marines, the Japanese intelligence files, the story that the Navy had never told. Her book, The Coffin That Wouldn't Sink, was published in 2003. It brought John Hawkins's story to a new generation, but it came 9 years too late. John never knew how famous he became. He never knew that his techniques were studied at Annapolis. He never knew that the Navy Special Warfare community, the SEALs and their support personnel, considered him a spiritual ancestor. He never knew that the modern Navy's Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewmen, the SWCC, traced their lineage directly to men like him, small boat operators who do the impossible, who go where they're not supposed to go, who save lives that are supposed to be lost. But perhaps that's appropriate. John Hawkins never cared about recognition. He never cared about medals or honors or historical footnotes. He cared about the Marines on the beach, the wounded men waiting in the darkness, the certain deaths that he could transform into possible survivals. At his funeral, a Marine veteran from the Guadalcanal campaign stood up to speak. He was 81 years old. He had traveled from his home in Michigan to say goodbye to the man who had saved his life 52 years earlier. His words were simple. The Japanese called his boat a floating coffin. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were stating a fact. But they didn't understand what they were looking at. That boat wasn't a coffin. It was an ambulance, a rescue ship, a second chance. And John Hawkins wasn't a driver. He was a guardian angel with a plywood hull and an engine that wouldn't quit. He paused. "I'm standing here today because of John Hawkins. My children exist because of John Hawkins. My grandchildren exist because of John Hawkins. And when I die, I know where I'm going. I'm going wherever John went. Because any heaven worth being in has a place for the man who drove through hell to bring us home." Let's go back to where we started. November 1942, Guadalcanal, a night bleeding fire, a wooden boat cutting through black water, a 23-year-old coxswain gripping the wheel. 47 Marines waiting on a burning beach. The Japanese called these boats floating coffins. They weren't wrong. Statistically, mathematically, logically, that boat should have been John Hawkins' grave. But statistics didn't account for a boy who learned to read water before he learned to read books. Mathematics didn't account for a man who drove faster than bullets. Logic didn't account for the stubborn, impossible, magnificent refusal to accept that some people couldn't be saved. 312 Marines, 312 futures, thousands of descendants who exist today because one man looked at certain death and said, "I'm going to need more fuel." The floating coffin became a lifeboat. The death trap became a rescue ship. The impossible became merely improbable, and the improbable became history. And now you know. Now you know the story the Navy tried to forget. The legend the Japanese couldn't kill. The man who proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the biggest gun. It's the person who refuses to stop. John Hawkins, Chief Petty Officer, coxswain, guardian angel of Guadalcanal. He just drove the boat, and that made all the difference.